In life, we will meet resistance, which can leave us feeling worn down and worn out. But we can find a reason to keep going. Show up, push through, and never give up.
Last week, we started a series that's all about how hope changes everything. And this week, I want to talk to you about never giving up. More specifically, we're talking about resilience. Resilience is our ability to find a reason to keep moving forward and to grow stronger after we have struggled or failed or faced some really hard stuff in our life. I think that we all have the ability to build resilience as we go through life. No matter what happens to us, good, bad, or in between somewhere, we can find the ability to keep going, to keep growing, and to keep from giving up. That's what resilience offers us. And that's what I hope that we'll be able to learn more about over the next few weeks. The Bible refers to God in many ways: provider, healer, king, friend, good father, love. And we know that all of those things are true, but sometimes facing trouble in life can make us question everything that we believe about God. We may wonder if God really is who he says he is. Is God really good to me if my family still broke up? Is God really healer if I still struggle with depression? Is God really our peace when there's so much conflict in the world around us? Basically, in moments of pain and setback, we start asking ourselves this question: is God really worth trusting and following? And sometimes we feel like the answer is definitely yes, but other times we're just maybe not quite as sure. And that's when we start to struggle to find reasons for sticking with our faith and taking all of this God stuff seriously. And eventually there comes a point when these kinds of unanswered, unresolved questions might cause us to give up on God. When we live in such a difficult time in the world, it's hard to think that God cares. When life is so stressful and tough, it's easy to wonder if God is really there to help. When trouble comes, it's easy to think that it might be best to try and get through it on our own. These are big questions, and they are normal questions to ask when you're going through a difficult time. Perhaps the real question that we're asking is, can God handle this? Does following Jesus really change everything when we're going through something that's super difficult? Is God still good when life is still hard? About 2,000 years ago, Jesus lived and walked and talked on this earth. And while he was here, several of his closest followers wrote down everything that they heard him say and saw him do. Those events are found in 4 books of the Bible known as the Gospels, each one named after the guy who wrote it: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, this is super important because it means that the words we're reading in these books aren't just words. They're real things that Jesus said to his followers that can still help us today. And it also means that we have a record from people who actually hung out with Jesus and knew him up close and personal. We get to see what they had to say about him, and that changes everything. Because for generations, the people of Israel had been relying on prophets and priests to tell them what God was like. But there was always a sort of mystery surrounding God until Jesus showed up. Jesus came to clear up any confusion. He is the perfect representation of what God is like. And when it comes to building a resilient faith, this is super helpful for us to keep in mind. Today, we're going to look at something Jesus said when talking to his closest friends, telling them what's ahead for them in life. Take a look. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble. John 16:33a. Now immediately, Jesus tells the disciples that he wants them to have peace. Why? Because he knows what lies ahead for them in this world. Trouble. Let's be honest, that doesn't sound like great news. I mean, who wants to hear Jesus basically say, I want you to have peace about everything because life is going to be really hard? To the disciples listening, this would have not been that surprising. They were lower income Jewish men living in the Roman Empire where speaking out or challenging authority could get you killed. They understood trouble. But there was a part of them that thought that maybe Jesus would change things. Maybe he would fix all of that bad stuff and do away with all the hard things. But then Jesus says this, and the crazy thing is the disciples had no idea just how true Jesus' words were. That very night, Jesus was going to be arrested, given an unfair trial, be beaten, and then crucified on a cross. So when Jesus says, you will have trouble, he is speaking to the disciples and to himself. Jesus knew that no one escapes difficulty in this world. But Jesus didn't stop there. Keep reading with me. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. John 16:33. Jesus tells us that we can take heart, meaning that we can have confidence because he has overcome everything the world can throw at us. Again, the disciples have no idea what's coming, like how Jesus is hours away from death. But they also didn't know that they were just a few days away from Jesus coming back to life. So when Jesus says, I have overcome the world, he is talking as the Son of God who will die and literally overcome death, which is the worst trouble the world can throw at us. And that means Jesus has also overcome all of the trouble that we face, all of the pain, all of the disappointment, all of the suffering, all of the bad that comes with living in this world. Jesus overcame it all. But what does that mean exactly? It means the worst stuff is not the final word. It means when things get bad, and they will, that the story isn't over. When Jesus defeated death, he rewrote the end of the story. Suffering and pain and loss don't win. Jesus and everything Jesus represents, like love, compassion, mercy, grace, goodness, justice, and peace, those things win. And that's the final word. Our stories don't end in difficult moments. We can always choose to trust that God's love, compassion, mercy, grace, goodness, justice, and peace will always have the final word. And knowing that is true, living as though that is true, can help us build resilience. Because that means even in our hardest, darkest moments, we can have faith in who Jesus is and what Jesus did and what that means for our story and our hurt. Things can get bad. They will get bad. But the story isn't over. Jesus' death and resurrection shows us that bad things happen, but God isn't done working. We can trust God in our trouble because the story isn't over. We can trust God is good and God is with us. And when we do, we build a resilient faith, one that never gives up on God. Resilient faith knows that God is still working. And if Jesus, facing arrest and death, never gave up on God, we can choose not to give up on God too. If the disciples who spent time with Jesus and faced their own persecution and death for their faith never gave up on God, we can choose not to give up too. No matter what trouble you're dealing with, you can choose to have hope and never give up on God. In spite of the circumstances you face, in spite of every trouble that comes your way, in spite of everything that tries to convince you that God isn't good or can't be trusted, we can be resilient in the face of all of those things, knowing that God is walking with us, working for us, and helping us get through it all. In those hard and awful moments, you have access to a God who is in it with you. In this world, you will have trouble, but because of Jesus, because of the resurrection, you can also have peace. And I believe that that can give you hope in even the most hopeless of circumstances, the kind of hope that changes everything, the kind that helps you believe that you can get up, that you can keep going, and you can keep believing that there is still good to come because of God. the kind that helps you build resilience in your faith. So, what can you do to begin having a resilient faith when you face difficult things now? Start by asking yourself these questions that we talked about last week. What is happening? Ask yourself what trouble in your life now or from your past is causing you to wonder if God is good or worth following. Maybe somebody let you down in a significant way. Maybe something happened that was totally out of your control, even something tragic or traumatic. Maybe a Christian did something to you or around you that caused you to question everything. Get really honest about what is happening or what has happened that's caused you to want to give up on God. Number 2, what is true no matter what? Now, answering this question isn't a quick fix, and it isn't saying that the trouble you're facing isn't real or big or overwhelming, but asking this will begin to shift the way that you see your circumstances, which is exactly where resilience begins. The truth is, no matter what trouble you faced or are facing or will face in the future, Jesus is with you. He's not overwhelmed by your problems or doubts. He's not ignoring you. He's not overpowered by the problem, and he will help you walk through it. In other words, he can help you build resilience as you keep going step by step. And remember that God is good, and God is still writing the story that will give you a different perspective. Number 3, what can you do? When everything feels like it's falling apart, when the trouble feels overwhelming, get back to the basics. Remember what we know to be true about God because of Jesus and what we know to be true about what Jesus offers us. God is good. God is with us. God gives us peace. And because of that, we can never give up on God. But if getting to that place feels too difficult right now, start with just giving the trouble you're facing to God on a daily basis. It's so important to talk to God about what you're going through. It doesn't have to be fancy or formal, but it should be real. Instead of giving up on God when you experience trouble, get honest with Him. Talk openly about the questions that you have and the doubts that you're experiencing or the help that you need, and continue to show up and connect with God. That's a great way to build a resilient faith. Remember, never, ever give up on God. As we wrap up the session today, I want you to think about this question. What's one thing that I want to remember that is true about God no matter what?